there's sort of advice or comments about women. So that's things like women need to get in the kitchen, women need to follow the man's directions, the man is allowed to put a woman in her place.
In news to absolutely no one, some men, when having private conversations with other men, make demeaning and degrading comments about women. But what's changed in recent years is that these conversations are becoming more public, in online chat forums, in videos, and across social media. Even if you don't want to take part in these conversations, the algorithm will sometimes serve you videos with controversial views about how women should act and how men should treat them. This content drives the online space known as the manosphere. On today's episode of What in the World from the BBC World Service, we're going to find out what the manosphere is, why it matters, and ask whether it may be impacting young men's attitude of themselves and women. Hello, I'm William, and today I'm joined by Jackie Wakefield, the BBC's disinformation reporter. Jackie, hi.
Hi.
So you've been covering the manosphere for a bit of time now, and in fact you have a documentary that you're working on. We'll come to that later. But for now, can you just define what the manosphere is?
So the manosphere is defined as a collection of online spaces where extreme misogyny is discussed and talked about. Back when the internet started, there were specific forums where the manosphere sort of started. So that was forums like, you might be familiar with 4chan or Reddit, kind of internet forums like this where men could kind of congregate and chat to each other. But now, and with the introduction with more algorithmic social media, so things like TikTok, Instagram Reels, it really is everywhere. It's on every app. It's in kind of almost every community in a way.
And what about podcasts?
Yes, podcasts is also a big place where the manosphere kind of spreads their ideas to wider audiences. I'm sure you've seen clips of Andrew Tate's podcast. That's one that obviously went very viral a couple of years ago and really brought those manosphere ideas into the mainstream. The manosphere is quite loosely defined. There could be people that it's almost like a spectrum is how I kind of like to think of it. There's a very extreme side where you hear what some of these guys are saying and you're like, that is stuff that we would never say. But then you've got people on the other end of the spectrum that might have much larger audiences who sort of dabble with manosphere or masculinity ideas.
And let's actually pause and just clarify who Andrew Tate is. People might have heard of him. He's an influencer and describes himself as a misogynist. And in the past, he said things like, quote, there's no such thing as an independent female, and said that women should, quote, bear responsibility for being sexually assaulted. He's accused of several crimes in Romania, including human trafficking and rape, which he has strongly denied. So, Jackie, can we be a bit concrete? What are these people saying?
They are saying a mixture of things. So there's kind of three categories, right? There's advice for young men. That advice includes things like you need to be a traditional man, you need to be the breadwinner, you need to work out, you need to get your body in shape. Then there's sort of advice or comments about women. So that's things like women need to get in the kitchen, women need to follow the man's directions, the man is allowed to put a woman in her place. And then you've kind of got the more general, I guess, finance advice is the other aspect of these communities. So a lot of the young men that I've spoken to often stumble upon these communities by looking for financial advice, and these are the first videos that they often come across. So that's also a big selling point of these manosphere figures, is they give you business advice and they tell you this is how you can be successful, and then they bring in all these other harmful ideas about women and harmful ideas about men and masculinity.
And you've teased there a number of the ways that men find themselves in the manosphere. We've actually been speaking to one man who said that he was quite vulnerable at a particular time in his life. This is Will Adolphi.
Well, when I was about 18, 19 at university, I was struggling with my mental health at the time. And I began watching content online. Firstly, it started with pickup artist content. So looking at ways to get with women on nights out, strategies I can try to appear attractive. And it was this sort of content, which I think looking back, I was looking at ways in which I can make myself valued and attractive to the world and to women. I felt a lot of deep insecurity within me at that time. I felt ugly as a kid. Felt ugly. I felt small, and growing up in a culture where there was this kind of man box, rigid sense of masculinity, and that insecurity around what I wasn't matching up to led me to seeking answers online. So one point that's really crucial is that the manosphere amplifies existing cultural ideas around masculinity. So what is happening offline within the culture and the collective socialization of men is informing the messaging online. And that's really important to understand, because it's not just about the manosphere itself. My collective socialization as a boy, as a man, started when I was born. Boys are actually treated differently. But then when I was in my early 20s was when I discovered the masculinity influencer who became a father figure. And that went on for until I was probably about 25. And it took me ages. And I'm still processing the kind of views that I inherited then.
Jackie, Will now works as a psychotherapist, and he delivers workshops about healthy masculinity. I want to pick up on something he said. He mentioned that the manosphere amplifies existing cultural ideas about masculinity. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, I mean, sexism isn't new. It's been around for forever. And what these manosphere guys are doing is they're sort of just applying a new language and a new extreme idea to sexist ideas that are already out there. I mean, as Will kind of touched on, these ideas can be harmful for men and women. I mean, it's been a really long time that young men have felt a lot of pressure to, be breadwinners and earn a lot of money and be a certain height. And this is what the manosphere influencers and manosphere communities really peg a lot of their language to, is those sort of insecurities that men have always had. And then in the meantime, they also amplify those ideas that society have always had about women. The idea that the men can boss women around, that women need to, embrace traditional motherhood. This is stuff that has always been there. And it's just these communities have allowed it to foster and become something even more extreme.
And I want to zoom out for a second. We've talked a lot about, the manosphere influencers, but let's look at society at large. Certainly here in the UK, in recent years, recent decades, there's been a movement when it comes to women about all women are beautiful. Women shouldn't live up to these unrealistic expectations, these glossy photo shoots in fashion magazines. Yet for men, we don't always have that same notion, and indeed for young boys, that you're already enough the way you are. There are these existing ideals, like you have to be hulking like the Hulk, you have to be the breadwinner.
These are things that comes from a sexist society, right? So we also need to, just as much as we're telling women they don't have to fit into these traditional female stereotypes, men don't have to either. So I think it is really about making sure that men don't feel this pressure to be this quite harmful idea of masculinity, or just one idea of masculinity that, exists, and that's fine, but not every man has to fit that.
And Jackie, one of the ways that misogynistic language is spread and normalized is through online memes. And I actually want to bring in a woman who studies this. This is Anita Fuentes from the Complutense University in Madrid.
Memes are not just communication tools. I think they're emotional weapons. In a TEDx talk that I gave a couple years ago, I argued that memes pack both emotion and ideology into short, viral formats. And in doing so, they make you feel like you understand the world. And that's exactly what gives them political power. Now, the manosphere uses memes to circulate ideas about women, about sexuality or masculinity that would sound absurd or grotesque if you said them outright. But meme culture allows these ideas to spread by cloaking them in irony and humor, so that if you disagree, you're accused of being too sensitive, of not getting the joke.
Jackie, back to you now. One word that comes up in these discussions is incel. That's involuntarily celibate. How does that relate to this?
Involuntary celibate is one of kind of the first communities of the manosphere. And interestingly enough, the community was started in the early 2000s by a woman who, sadly, she couldn't find any connections. She'd just come out as a lesbian, and she was searching for connection online among other people who were also involuntarily celibate and couldn't find, that sexual connection. And then, unfortunately, it did get hijacked very early on by mostly young men who, I guess, co-opted the term incel to once again mean that they couldn't get sex, but that was women's fault and women withholding sex from them. And they kind of believed that they were owed sex by women. And it's sort of an interesting combination of feelings where the young men, well, I'm saying young men, but it's all ages, mostly young men, in these groups, are very self-hating. They believe that they're not attractive enough, they're not successful enough, but they also at the same time blame women for their, inability to form those relationships. A lot of, violent attacks have occurred and they've been in connection with these incel groups. So one famous one was in California about 10 years ago now, where one guy killed women at his university, and he was very, very active in these incel communities, and incidents like that have continued to happen since.
Violence is an extreme example, but people are worried that these online conversations are having other offline, real-world consequences. Could you tell us about those?
Particularly young men who are engaging in these conversations online or in these communities, that does filter out into their everyday lives. There's been reports here in the UK that have profiled this schoolyard misogyny where young men have, sworn at female teachers, refused to listen to them, have also been misogynistic towards girls in their class. And it has kind of filtered into that, everyday misogyny and making it more extreme and excusing it. When I've spoken to teachers across the UK, in Kenya and Mexico, all of them remark on this thing that, it is difficult because these online communities are excusing these attitudes that young men may have, had before, but been held accountable for in their community. However, now they're actually being rewarded for having these ideas in their online communities, in their online spaces, and then that's making them bring it again and again into their everyday lives.
So Jackie, building on that, how do we solve this? This is Will, the psychotherapist.
There's lots of solutions here, I think, and I've been focusing on 3 pillars here. So education, firstly, and what I mean by that is, what does critical thinking actually look like? And also redefining success. What does success mean for a man, for a person in a capitalist society? Well, we've been conditioned to believe that it's about earning money and it's about gaining followers and having high impact and influence. That doesn't necessarily bring happiness. And so at the heart of this for me is, how do we evolve masculinity towards a more open, more mature expression and idea? And we need to see that. We need to see that in films. We need to see it in books. We need to see it in music. And we need more and more men to stand up, speak up, and actually get involved in this conversation around what works about masculinity, what doesn't.
Will also told us that joining a support group and being more open with his emotions really helped him. So Jackie, what can someone do if they have a friend or a colleague who they think is being sucked in to this online community? Or what can they do if they themselves want to get out of this community?
I think the first thing that needs to be acknowledged here is just how easy it is to be sucked into the manosphere. So lead with empathy. Every young guy that I've spoke to has talked about how it's really unavoidable. You look up any content that's sort of primarily male audiences, this manosphere, it's there. If you look up gaming content, most of the influencers are manosphere or manosphere adjacent. Gym content, financial content, bodybuilding. It's really difficult to find community online as a man and find spaces that are productive and aren't associated with the manosphere. So first of all, I think that's the most important thing to understand. The next bit is try, I guess, not to give up on your loved one. What every single guy I've spoken to has said is what kind of made them leave or prompted them to start thinking about it was role models in their own life, particularly male role models. So one guy mentioned while he was at uni, he came home after a semester and spoke to his dad and realised the issues he was facing, heartbreak, loneliness, it wasn't just him and it wasn't anyone's fault. This is something that we all go through, and I think having those conversations with everyone in our lives is really important. The other thing I think that's really important is exposing young men to content by women as well, and making sure that there is a mix of stuff that goes on here, that there's female and male role models. I think we talk a lot about young men having very, role models in their own life, and we often talk about them being men, but it's important to, have young men view women as successful and women as people that they can also look up to. But I think it just always comes back to community and speaking about these things that we're struggling with, because at the end of the day, what the manosphere wants is it wants young men to be isolated. It wants them to come into these communities. It wants to make money off them often, and keep them there and keep them isolated from the people in their real life. So just forming community is very important.
Jackie, thanks for explaining that.
Thanks.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching another episode of What in the World from the BBC World Service. I'm William Lee Adams. If you enjoyed this video, please do give us a like and scribble your comments down below. And why not join the around 2 million people who already subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel? We'll see you again soon. Bye.